Do you ever get irritated by boys' clubs? Do you want to break up established groups of people doing established things by using politics to insert yourself into their business? Do you like using guilt in order to make people act in a way that you would prefer they would act? Then boy oh boy, do I have the video for you. So needless to say, everyone has at some point in their life encountered at least the concept of a male space, more colloquially known as a boys' club. It's basically just a group of people who are all male doing things. They might go bowling Saturday night, they might drink a few beers in the parking lot after work, they might meet up in Tom's basement to watch the game on whichever day the sports ball game is on. I wouldn't know. The times might vary, the people who attend might vary, the activities that they partake in might vary. The only two constants is that the meetings are somewhat regular and attended exclusively by men. Now, the men-only part is pretty much never stated explicitly, especially in this day and age, but if you are a person who has been to one of these where you felt, oh, this feels like a male-only space, yes, the bad vibrations you were picking up were because you were there. Now, that wasn't because of you personally as an individual. Outside of the male space, everybody there would have liked you just fine. But the reason you didn't feel welcome is because you weren't welcome, and that was because of your identity. Now, male spaces exist everywhere, but they are distinct from male-dominated spaces, which are unfortunately very often equated to male spaces, especially by individuals who would like to change things to their liking in those spaces and don't shy away from using guilt. And it's generally agreed upon that male spaces are a bad thing because they promote racism, sexism, homophobia, and toxic masculinity. But are they? And do they? Now, making statements about many groups of different people doing different things in different places all over the world is difficult, but having been to quite a few male spaces over the course of my life, I can tell you, no, like generally speaking, the overwhelming majority of them do not. I mean, do cigar smoke-filled back rooms exist where crusty old men grab the asses of nubile young waitresses while playing poker and swirling neat whiskey in their tumblers? Of course those places exist. There used to be a lot more of them, but they're still around. Now, we can argue about whether or not these places actually promote these things, or whether they provide an outlet for men who have the urge to do these things, to do them in a place that isn't a place where that is wholly inappropriate and makes people who don't know what they're getting into suffer. After all, ideally, the waitresses are informed that this is part of their job and they get paid for it. And who are you to tell them what they're allowed to do with their bodies? But such male spaces certainly encapsulate the ideal of toxic masculinity, which I found out recently isn't actually a feminist term. It actually originated in the mythopoetic men's movement, which falls under the wide umbrella of like men's rights, or at least men's advocacy groups, and it describes all the fucked up expectations placed on men by society to basically behave like a dick. Thank you to the person who told me about this, by the way. You know who you are. However, contrary to popular belief, this isn't how most male spaces are like. I mean, don't get me wrong, you will find a lot of manifestations of toxic masculinity in such spaces, like hardcore banter, even sometimes borderline bullying. But what people tend not to understand is that these things serve to make the men who attend comfortable with being vulnerable. That's right, everyone who's never been to a male space, I will give you an exclusive behind the closed doors look into what goes on in there. Now, why does this happen in male spaces? Why do they do the insulting and the bantering? Well, essentially, they're getting out of character. Now, the reason these manifestations of toxic masculinity happen in these spaces is so everyone who is in the space can prove to everyone else that yes, Everyone here is a real man, a tough guy, and just really like a strong dude. And so it's okay to cry. That is what that is. The purpose of doing that is men creating an environment wherein they do not need to feel ashamed or weak for sharing their emotions. Now, personally, I'm a very feminine man. Somebody once said to me that I was actually not a man, but a male-adjacent demi-boy, which I don't give a shit, really. Call me whatever you want, I'll stick with man. The point is, I don't really have a hard time talking about my feelings. As a matter of fact, I sometimes wear some of my feelings on my sleeve. Now, I wasn't always like this. I had my phases of being an emotional shut-in, and sometimes I still do have my phases of being an emotional shut-in, but generally, it's always been easy to open up to friends and therapists about things. Not like the high-tiered, really deep stuff, but like more than the average man, let's say. And that is a crucial factor that a lot of people just kind of overlook when it comes to men and emotions and men showing emotions. Just having us like sit down and talk about our feelings doesn't work because it makes us feel massively uncomfortable. We have to do the whole song and dance to feel like we are in a space where we are not being judged and where we can receive love and empathy and understanding from our peers. Now, we can talk about whether this is nature or nurture, and obviously the correct answer is both. But whether or not you subscribe to that idea or a completely different idea, the fact remains that it is what it is. But that is why a male space isn't fluffy pillows and cuddly blankets, but a lake where you are fishing on a boat in silence, broken only occasionally by the cracking open of a can of beer. Men just have a hard time talking about their feelings. It takes more work to get a man to feel comfortable talking about his feelings. Talking about our feelings is good for us, and we need it as much as anyone else, but forcing us to do it will have the exact opposite effect of what it's supposed to do. It'll just make us feel more uncomfortable. In order for men to be able to share our feelings, we need to feel strong and confident. We need to be able to drop the mask a little bit, and unfortunately, many of us simply can't do this in the presence of women. I'm sorry, but it's true. A huge amount of men feel like they really need to perform all of these things that women mostly don't even like in order to be able to impress those women. It is really deeply ingrained into our brains very often. So it's no surprise that men have a difficult time letting their guard down. And to make this no longer be necessary isn't as easy as just telling a dude that this isn't necessary. It requires a lot more work, if it works at all, because some people just have their emotions and express their feelings in a different way to others. And just because they don't conform to your preferred method doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them. I'm not quite sure why, but a lot of people come to me to talk about their relationships. And a situation that I've encountered several times is a woman will sit down and say, "Oh, I finally got my boyfriend to talk about his feelings with me. He opened up in a way that I've been wanting him to do for like a long period of time now. And then he said something that I didn't like, so I got mad. And now it feels like he doesn't want to talk about his feelings anymore." Which, like, yeah, what did you expect was gonna happen? If you were to share your internal world, your feelings with a person, right? And this is a person that's been trying to get you to do that for a long time, maybe. And then they openly judge you and get angry about something that you feel but they don't like. Would you feel comfortable sharing your emotions with that person in the future? You'd be afraid to trust that person, is what you'd be, and with good reason. That is one of the defining characteristics of male spaces that people who don't get to go into male spaces never get to see. And many people who do exist in male spaces never truly realize. There is no judgment there, just all of the judgment is suspended for as long as you are in the male space. And trust me when I say that this is necessary, because men have some fucked up thoughts. I'm talking like feeling the need to murder people that you just love deeply. Committing heinous crimes against humanity that make you sick to your stomach. I mean, don't get me wrong, not all men have these, and a lot of women also have a lot of fucked up thoughts. Just tend to be different one. Everybody has fucked up thoughts, and like everybody has really fucked up thoughts sometimes, I hope. But these male spaces are the only spaces in the entire world where these men feel comfortable enough to share these things with others. They are the only spaces where they can feel like they can be themselves without being judged and constantly having to perform. And just for like a second, right? Think about what this means. In this male-dominated patriarchal world that caters to the every whim of men, men feel uncomfortable and judged and under pressure in almost all of the spaces, and the few spaces where they don't feel that, a huge portion of the population, if not most of the population, agrees that those spaces are evil and bad. Just fathom that for a second. And realize that if you are, a human being that exists or has at any point existed, you can probably relate to this. Yes, the whole feeling judged for being who you are thing, literally wherever you go, men feel this too. They feel it just as much as you do, except with the difference that society has decided they have no right to feel that way, which some of you probably can also empathize with. This is something that just baffles me whenever I meet it in the wild, which is like more often than I'd like. But you know how for most women it's essential to find a partner in life with whom they can connect and with whom they feel comfortable sharing their internal emotional worlds with. For men, this just isn't even a factor that they consider. Not because they don't want it. They really do, even if most of them are too manly to admit it. But mostly it's because they feel they have no right to it. Yes, this is a true statement. Men in general do not feel as though they have the right to be emotionally understood and supported. So the only way to get rid of male spaces that doesn't make you a massive piece of shit is to create a society wherein males feel able to be themselves and be accepted and supported outside of those spaces. Now, is this realistic? No, it's not. Is this even entirely desirable? Also, probably not. Look, even though certain traits are more common in certain groups, every individual is ultimately just that, an individual. Any individual will not feel super comfortable in most spaces in society, and any individual will have like a few spaces where they feel very uncomfortable. I, for instance, feel very uncomfortable in family spaces, or in this special kind of Philistine bourgeois space. And I feel very comfortable in spaces where it's mostly my close friends, which pretty much evenly includes members of all of the genders as they occur proportionally in society. Like spaces that are for like one gender only, I generally don't feel as comfortable with as like a space that is mixed. But that's just me. But I don't feel the urge to go into other people's spaces where they feel comfortable and force them to change so I feel comfortable there. Because those spaces aren't about me. If you are doing something in private, you can have the expectation of comfort. Taking issue with toxic masculinity, unfortunately, I would say even for most people, it mostly expresses as just demonizing men and everything that men do, and that is by definition toxic masculinity. Not understanding that even toxic masculinity is dealt with by men through manifestations of actual toxic masculinity. And if in response to men's difficulties to open up about their feelings and their methods for creating spaces wherein they do comfortable enough to do that is fuck it, they should change for something that I am more comfortable with and that I prefer and that I understand more, congratulations, you are an asshole devoid of empathy and human decency. And before you start talking about how men don't have a right to that because of power, I'd like to remind you that Bob Johnson has spent the last 30 years repairing industrial water boilers and doesn't even own the house that he has lived in for most of that time, because that actually is the property of a shady bank with a name so forgettable that if I said it right now, you would have forgotten it. I just said it and you have immediately forgotten it. He gets to crack open a six-pack with his mates every once in a while and talk about how he likes the office intern's big tits, because whatever space you are in, you are doing whatever the equivalent of that is, also. Policing and breaking up these male spaces because you are doing something that's good for society and fighting toxic gender roles is just you trying to feel self-righteous about being a nosy cunt. You are proclaiming to try to promote acceptance of a huge variety of groups of people, all of whom deserve that acceptance. But at the same time, you promote the opposite of acceptance for one specific group of people because you really want carte blanche to hate someone and to be just a piece of shit toward them and to blame all of the evils that have happened to you in your life on those people by being needlessly cruel instead of forcing yourself to have empathy to someone that you might not understand. How can anyone be surprised at an ever-growing number of men being, let's say, a little bit discontent with the fact that their mere existence is presented as some kind of primordial evil? I wonder if something like this has ever happened with another gender in history and it was also a bad thing. Listen, in an ideal world, people of all genders could feel welcome in male spaces, because though these coping mechanisms and ways of dealing with your feelings do correlate with gender, correlation is not always like 100%, and there's always exceptions to those rules, and often those people are kind of fucked. There's plenty of women who recoil at the notion of being cuddled by their girlfriends and a big old teddy bear that has like an internal warming thing, which might be a fire hazard now that I think about it, and would much rather go duck shooting in the forest and then stare at the campfire, not saying a word for like hours on end. And the same is true like the other way around. But unfortunately, they can't enter that male space. Those who do make it into a comfort space that isn't traditionally made for someone of their identity often have to prove themselves in order to be able to enter, which is unfortunate. It really shouldn't have to be that way. But up until the point in which society accepts men as the emotional creatures that they are, instead of expecting them to conform to a more palatable and more convenient form of emotionality, that shit ain't gonna happen. And the same is true about various other ways of coping with feelings and emotions. Like a lot of people could do with a little more tolerance of spaces for people who just are not like them. Like, just imagine a male batterer going into like a support group for female victims of domestic abuse and expecting all of them to cater to his emotional needs. Would you not find that a bit weird? Yet somehow, when it's the other way around, it's completely acceptable. Which is, yeah, thumbs up, feminism, lol. Not every space is inclusive to every kind of person. And so long as that space is in private, it doesn't fucking need to be. Thank you very much for watching this video. Like, comment, subscribe, do all the things, share this to your relevant communities, but do not spam them. Consider supporting me on Patreon or Subscribestar, buying the ebook, which is the only. Actually, I mean, with the things going back in like them revving up the economy, lifting some regulations, maybe I should look up if it's shipping again. And in that spirit, have some fucking tolerance for other people, is what I'm saying. Like, don't just assume that your way of being emotional is just the correct way, and everyone else should just adhere to that. And if they don't do it, it's wrong and it's offensive to you somehow. Have some fucking decency. And see you around, cunts.